Hi, I'm Claire, and I'm 34 years old. Let me tell you about the time I decided to get back at my mean mother-in-law who was determined to make my life miserable. I tried to be patient and ignore her behavior for a while, but eventually I couldn't take it anymore. Let me explain a bit. Whenever my mother-in-law gave me something, it was never very good. Like on our wedding day. This present is from my mother-in-law, Justine. Let's see what's inside. It's a used spatula. Well, thank you. And on my 31st birthday, Justine, you really shouldn't have. What's inside? Oh, what exactly is it? It's a shovel, dear. Ah, how nice. But it looks a bit old. It's a fixed-up shovel. I later discovered she took it from the neighbor's shed and gave it to me. Another time, when I hosted a dinner party, she brought the cheapest bottle of wine she could find. At that point, I wished she wouldn't bother doing anything for me at all. But what really bothered me were the times she insisted on cooking for me, only for the food to taste awful every single time. At first, I was understanding. Not everyone is a great cook, and that's okay. I thought it was the thought that counted, not necessarily the taste. But then I learned that the same dishes she made for me tasted amazing when she cooked for other people. After trying to convince myself otherwise for a while, I realized she was intentionally making my food taste bad. Claire, try my casserole. I made it. I'm really full from all the food you've given me. Please, just take a bite for me. I reluctantly took a bite, feeling uneasy about what might happen next. As expected, the casserole tasted terrible. It made me wonder if she was trying to harm me with it. You might be wondering what my husband thought about all of this. Well, he didn't believe me. I didn't blame him. It's tough to accept such a strange idea, especially when it's about your own mother. But I kept asking him to try the food she made for me, hoping he'd see what I meant. Every time, he dismissed me, saying I was imagining things. Sometimes he'd almost try it, but Justine always stopped him. Hey, that food is for Claire. I made it just for her, considering her dietary needs. Yes, I have specific dietary needs because I'm a vegetarian, but I married into a family that loves their meat. So whenever there's a big family meal, my mother-in-law, Justine, would make a separate dish for me, which I appreciated. But it always seemed like she didn't put much effort into it. After realizing she was messing with my food, I tried to understand her. Maybe she was upset about having to make a special dish for me. But that didn't explain why she gave me terrible gifts all the time. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt until a few months ago. I invited a coworker who's also a vegetarian to a family cookout. Justine made 2 vegetarian dishes, one for my coworker and one for me. I tasted my coworker's dish secretly, and it was delicious, but mine was awful. It was clear that Justine could cook well. When I told my husband Liam about it, he just brushed it off. Oh, come on, Claire, you're overreacting and being a bit rude. I'm telling you, she's intentionally messing with my food. She doesn't want to make good food for me. Even if the food isn't great, which I doubt, what do you expect from her? She's just one person. Maybe you could help her out in the kitchen, especially with vegetarian dishes. I've offered to help many times, but she gets defensive and thinks I don't like her cooking, which you don't. And when I suggest things, she gets upset. There's no pleasing her. Maybe you should bring your own food to gatherings then, even if it seems rude. It's not like you have a serious allergy. You're just a vegetarian, and everyone can make vegetarian food. But remember Lucy, your coworker? She was nice. Yeah, Lucy's food was great, even the vegetarian dishes. They both took a moment to think about everything. Liam sat down on the bed, thinking deeply. Well, say something, Claire urged. Look, you're my wife, and I love you. I want to trust you, but I think you might be imagining things. I understand that my mom can be odd with gifts, but sabotaging your food, that's really messed up and dangerous, isn't it? Exactly. One time, I swear I smelled bleach in my food. I had to make an excuse to go to the bathroom so I wouldn't have to eat it. Claire, maybe because you and my mom don't get along, you're seeing her differently than the rest of us. She's a fantastic cook. I agree. After trying Lucy's food tonight, I'm sure she can cook well, but for some reason, she doesn't put in the effort with me. Enough! I won't let you talk badly about my mom anymore. She's a great cook. You're imagining things. I was frustrated. How many times did I have to convince him I was telling the truth? I decided to prove it. I waited for the next family gathering to make my move. About a month later, my mother-in-law called. I'm good, thank you. How about you? Oh, I'm excited. We're having another family gathering this weekend to celebrate Uncle JJ's return from France. Can you and Liam make it? Of course, Justine. We wouldn't miss it. Oh, that's great. Uncle JJ prefers simple things, even though he's from France. So we're keeping it casual with sliders and sandwiches. You can even bring your coworker friend again. She was lovely. Unfortunately, she can't make it this time, but Liam and I will be there. Oh, that's too bad. But I'm glad you both can come. Oh, one more thing before I forget. I've decided to get you some special plates to make it easier to separate vegetarian and non-vegetarian dishes. They're beautiful navy blue plates. No problem, Justine. Thank you. Okay, see you soon. After hanging up, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. Normally, different plates wouldn't bother me, but knowing what I knew about her, I realized it was just another way for her to make me feel isolated from everyone else. Everyone else in the family always enjoys their meals, but mine are always terrible. So when I complain, I look picky and fussy. But that's not true. There are rumors going around that I'm just being difficult, and I wish I could prove them wrong by sharing my food. But Justine always stops me and gets upset if I don't eat what she made. Sometimes I manage to avoid eating it, but usually I have to force it down quickly to avoid tasting it. Whenever I visit, I dread it and can't wait to leave and make my own food. But this weekend was different. I was excited because I had a plan to show everyone that I wasn't making things up. I had real concerns and everyone needed to see that. The weekend came and Liam and I brought our coleslaw to the barbecue. There was so much meat everywhere. Even the meat lovers thought it was too much. Despite my initial worries, the party was going well. I was enjoying chatting with my in-laws and playing with my nieces and nephews. But when Justine called us to the dining table, my stomach churned with dread. I forced myself to smile and sit next to Liam. You see, Claire, everyone's having fun. Why can't you relax? Mom put a lot of effort into this. Maybe if you had a better attitude, you'd enjoy the food. I was tired of Liam's lectures. He had no idea what it was like dealing with his mom's awful cooking. But I had a plan. Justine brought out the food, and my plate, as promised, was navy blue. It stood out among the white plates on the table, but I didn't care. I was ready for my revenge. As everyone sat down to eat and grace was said, I suddenly exclaimed, "Oh my goodness, is that a snake?" People were startled and chaos ensued. The kids got excited and wanted to see the snake, while the adults sprang into action, with the women leading the children inside and the men cautiously checking out where I pointed. While everyone was distracted, I followed behind the women, glancing back at the dinner table. Luckily, all the food looked similar, so it was hard to tell which plate was which. That's why my mother-in-law made a special plate for me, so she could tell which one had the bad food. As people started to come back from checking for the snake, I quickly swapped the sandwiches from my plate and Liam's. Just as Justine was coming back outside, Liam told her it was a false alarm and the snake was gone. As everyone returned to their seats, there was a sense of excitement in the air, despite the false alarm. People enjoyed the rush of adrenaline, even the elders. They settled back into their seats, and I apologized, saying, "Sorry, everyone. I must have misjudged the ground. Please excuse the disturbance." Everyone took it well, not too bothered by the interruption. "No problem, dear. It's better to be safe than sorry," someone replied, and everyone seemed to enjoy the little thrill of the snake scare. The mood shifted when Liam took a bite of what he thought was his sandwich, but it turned out to be my vegetarian one. "It's wild," he said before biting into it. Suddenly, he stopped and everyone's attention turned to him. He gagged and spat out the sandwich. "Ew, this is awful." "Liam, that's so rude," Justine scolded him. "I put so much effort into these dishes. Justine protested as everyone began to eat their food, enjoying the delicious flavors. They started questioning Liam about his reaction. Even Uncle JJ, who usually stayed quiet, said it tasted fine to him. I don't know, guys. The food just tasted weird to me for a moment. Sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to be rude. Maybe it's a new recipe. Let me try again. Liam attempted to take another bite, but he started gagging before it reached his mouth. Justine was getting flustered and complained about Liam's rudeness. Mom, I'm sorry, but I can't eat this. There's something wrong with it. Except it's not, I added, and everyone looked at me, surprised by my statement. It was then that Liam noticed I hadn't touched my food. Babe, why aren't you eating? Because it has meat in it, I admitted. The table fell silent, and I saw understanding dawn in Liam's eyes. Mom, have you been messing with Claire's food? Everyone exclaimed, shocked. Justine started shouting in response. Liam, I don't know what's gotten into you. Maybe it's your spoiled wife who convinced you, but I won't stand for this. Apologize now. No, Mom, it's your food that's spoiled. Claire was right, Liam declared. He handed his sandwich to Uncle JJ, who almost threw up after trying to take a bite. Justine's eyes turned to me, filled with venom. What have you done? She hissed. I should be asking you the same thing. You've been sabotaging my meals every time I come here, making me miserable. I confessed to everyone. I'm sorry for lying about the snake, but I needed a distraction. Justine has been poisoning my food since I joined this family. Everyone gasped in shock. It's true. I suspected it for a while, and I know I might have seemed picky, but try Justine's sandwich if you can stomach it, I urged. The sandwich made its way around the table, eliciting gagging and dry heaving from those who tried it. They advised the elderly and children not to eat it, and one person even considered going to the hospital due to the smell. Your move, Justine, I challenged. Okay, you got me. I was sabotaging your food, Justine confessed. Why would you do that? Because she hates me. She's always had it out for me since day one, Justine shouted. Liam suddenly looked ill. He vomited all over the grass and collapsed onto the patio sofa. Mom, what did you put in that sandwich? Liam asked weakly. Liam, Oh God, are you okay? That sandwich wasn't meant for you. I'm so sorry, everyone. Please forgive me, Justine exclaimed in panic. Uncle JJ's homecoming had to be cut short, and several family members rushed Liam to the hospital. It turned out that the sandwich contained rancid mushrooms with traces of cat feces, causing severe food poisoning. Liam was hospitalized for some time as he recovered, and my mother-in-law was arrested after confessing to her actions. The incident made me realize the extent of her hatred towards me. She was willing to harm me just because she despised me. If it had been me, she might have delayed getting help. But because it was her son, she rushed to fix her mistake. However, it was too late. Thankfully, Liam recovered fully. During his hospital stay, he repeatedly apologized for not believing me about his mother's actions. His mother attempted to post bail, but the other family members refused, insisting she needed to reflect on her actions. Visitors informed me of her remorse and realization of her mistakes after seeing her son suffer. However, I couldn't accept her apology. It took seeing her son in pain for her to acknowledge her wrongdoing. For years, she never considered the harm she was causing. Who knows what else she put in my food? I endured it in silence, often getting sick and missing work to recover. After sharing this with my husband, he felt even more sympathetic towards me and promised to always believe me. I'm relieved I could impart 2 lessons. Always trust your spouse and don't mess with me, or you might end up in jail.
Guess what it's like to travel abroad with my husband's money, my sister-in-law Betty boasted. I wonder how it feels to rely not only on your parents but also on your brother, she added, sounding a bit rude. I felt really angry at her boldness. Well, you're not any better. You stay at home all day but still hire a maid and don't do any chores, I snapped back. That's enough, both of you stop it. My father interrupted as our argument started to get out of hand. He calmed me down with a gentle look and then turned to Betty. It seems like you both can't enjoy your trip with us here. We'll head back home. "Sorry for disturbing," he said politely. "My name is Lisa. I'm almost 40 years old and I work while living with my father. My mom passed away from an illness 10 years ago, and my younger brother Jake, who is 5 years younger than me, has already gotten married and moved out. I live simply with my father in our bay house. It's not that I can't afford to live on my own. I choose to live with my father because I worry about him. After my mom died, he started having a lot of health problems and had to stop working as he got closer to retirement age. His health got worse to the point where he wouldn't eat for days unless reminded and would be stuck in bed for almost 2 weeks if he got sick. I couldn't leave my dad alone in that condition. At that time, my brother Jake was already working as a lawyer and was engaged to be married. Jake and his fiancée were planning to build a new home near ours, so it was obvious that I would continue living with my father. Jake is very talented compared to me. I never expected his wife to be so difficult. Jake's wife, Betty, stopped working as soon as they got married and became a homemaker. She doesn't do any chores herself and relies on a hired butler. Her days mostly involve fancy lunches and shopping at expensive stores. Jake is busy with his job, so he might not have much time to spend with Betty, but her extravagant lifestyle is surprising. Living near Jake and Betty's house, I couldn't help but hear about Betty's carefree life. What made it worse were her comments when she visited us. "When are you going to move out, Lisa? Aren't you embarrassed to still live at home at your age?" She teased me. I often bit my tongue and just smiled vaguely, not wanting to hear such words from a woman who doesn't do any housework and just enjoys herself. I wish she wouldn't come over at all, I thought to myself. But my father felt sorry for Betty, thinking Jake might be too busy and she might feel lonely. He didn't push her away. Instead, he often invited her to have dinner with us. I wish Jake and my father could understand how much Betty's behavior was affecting me emotionally. But when I saw my father, unaffected by Betty's bold attitude, happily eating dinner with her, I couldn't help but feel like as long as he was happy, that was all that mattered. Why did Jake marry someone like her? I often wondered about it, but I figured there must be qualities in Betty that only Jake could appreciate. I chose to ignore Betty's rude comments and quietly continued eating. That day, like usual, my father invited Betty to join us for dinner. Jake had been really busy with work lately, and Betty usually just helped herself to food prepared by the housekeeper. Maybe feeling sorry for Betty, my father decided to buy some fancy ingredients and suggested that the three of us have a nice meal together. I wasn't very excited about it, but since my father insisted, I didn't have much of a choice. I went to the supermarket in town and bought some ingredients, then managed to make some dishes I'd never tried before. My father, who hadn't been eating much lately, was really happy and joked, saying, "I'm extra hungry today." Betty showed up quite a bit later than we agreed and plopped down in a dining chair without even saying hello properly. The dishes I'd made were all laid out in front of her. "Now that we're all here, let's dig in," my father said cheerfully, but Betty didn't seem happy. She pushed the food around with her fork, let out a big sigh, and said, "Do you really expect me to eat something that looks this unappetizing?" Betty shot me a disdainful look as she glanced at the dishes. I stared back at her, then turned to my father in surprise. He also seemed taken aback, his mouth hanging open as he looked at Betty. "Well, it might not be as fancy as what your housekeeper prepares, but Lisa made all of this herself. Can't you show a bit more respect?" My father responded sternly. Betty immediately frowned. "I never said I wanted to eat with you guys. I'm just trying to create some memories here, and you serve me something that looks so unappealing. Can't you think about how I feel?" "What do you mean by making memories?" I muttered under my breath, but Betty caught on quickly. She looked down at me and my father, smirked, and said something shocking. "Well, your father won't be around for much longer, will he? I'm the devoted daughter-in-law keeping him company." So, I was expecting a sizable inheritance. At that moment, both my father and I were stunned into silence. The room fell quiet. Could this really be the woman that the smart Jake chose to marry? Talking about inheritance before someone has even passed away. There's something really wrong with that. "You're going to live for many more years." Before I knew it, I was shouting. Even Betty, who had been grumpily playing with her food, stopped when she saw me venting my anger. "Don't talk about inheritance to my dad. He might just be another person to you, but he's family to me. He's also family to Jake. He's the only living relative left for us after we lost our mother." My father gently restrained me as I leaned over the table, breathing heavily. I slowly sat back down, my anger toward Betty still burning inside. With a deep breath that seemed to break the tension, I felt my pent-up emotions deflate. "I'll pretend I didn't hear what you just said," my father said in a calm voice. Immediately, Betty scoffed. "All I did was speak the truth. I don't want the inheritance to go to a woman who's still living with her parents." Betty's words were blunt. I didn't have the energy to be angry anymore. She boldly brought up what my father had tried to ignore and hurled her insulting words and actions at us. "I'll leave this old house to you, sister-in-law. Looks like you won't have to worry about losing your place to live," Betty said with a mocking laugh. I wanted to argue back, but when I saw my father quietly shaking his head, I held my tongue. My father was too forgiving with Betty. Even as she feels lonely because Jake is often busy with work, it's not right to excuse an adult who doesn't know how to speak respectfully. My father glanced at my expression and murmured softly, "She's the one Jake picked." There was a sad smile on my father's face. He looked like a dad dealing with a troublesome daughter and also like a man who's been worn down by life. I couldn't bring myself to say anything when I saw my father's expression. I had words for both my father and Betty, but more than anything, I wanted to know what Jake thought about all of this. It's uncertain if Jake knows about Betty's behavior. If he's aware of it and ignoring it, then I feel obligated to speak up as his sister. In the end, Betty hardly ate the food I cooked and left early after a short conversation. Only my father and I remained in the spacious living room. Making memories, huh? Maybe she's onto something, I sighed quietly, noticing my father's figure suddenly appearing smaller as he muttered those words. Following Jake's suggestion, our family decided to take a trip to France. My father wanted to visit France while he could still walk without assistance, so Jake and I organized the trip. Initially, I suggested to Jake that he and Dad go on the trip alone without me, since Betty often made snide remarks toward me. I didn't want to spoil the happy atmosphere of the trip. However, Jake insisted that it would be better to have someone who usually observes Dad's condition, so he ended up buying 4 tickets. I reluctantly agreed to join them on the trip to France, and as I anticipated, Betty was in a sour mood the entire time, not speaking a word to anyone on the plane. Once we arrived, we headed straight to the heart of Paris and enjoyed sightseeing. My father was surprisingly lively, exploring every corner with enthusiasm. Betty seemed to brighten up a bit when Jake bought her a designer bag. She walked arm in arm with Jake, but I couldn't help but notice that Jake didn't seem particularly happy at that moment. I accidentally locked eyes with Betty, and she glared at me so intensely that my heart skipped a beat. "By the way, why is Lisa even here with us?" Betty let go of Jake's arm and confronted me. "I asked her to come just in case something happens to Dad. We need someone who can handle it." Jake tried to intervene, but it seemed like his words didn't register with Betty. She continued to stare at me, smirking. Betty spoke in a mean way, asking what it's like to use her husband's money to travel abroad. She said not to spend too much because plane tickets are expensive. Then she rudely suggested that Lisa could sleep outside instead of in a fancy hotel suite. Jake tried to stop her, but she didn't listen. Betty insulted Lisa, saying she lives off her family's money, including her brother's. Lisa felt really angry and upset at this. She fired back, saying Betty actually lives off Jake's money even though she's a housewife. Lisa pointed out that Betty hires someone else to do the housework. Their dad stepped in before things got worse. He calmly told Betty they'd leave because their presence was ruining her trip. He apologized to Lisa and asked her to check the bus schedule to the airport. Betty looked pleased. But Jake seemed worried. Jake suddenly realized that they would be left without anyone to help them once their parents left. He desperately tried to stop them from leaving, but their dad remained firm in his decision. He asked Lisa to check the bus schedule to the airport and promptly headed in that direction. Lisa had to follow her dad while keeping an eye on her brother and his wife. As they walked away, Jake shouted that they would be fine without their parents, disrespectfully calling them old man and old lady. Lisa felt upset at Betty for calling their dad old, but she didn't dwell on it. She hurried after her dad, listening to Jake's distressed cries and Betty's insults directed at him. Eventually, Jake burst into the cafe near the airport where they were having tea, looking frantic and sweaty. He rushed to their table and bowed his head in a flurry of panic. "I'm really sorry for what happened earlier. I'll make a proper apology later, but right now, I need your help with Betty," Jake said earnestly, bowing deeply. Dad and I exchanged surprised looks. "What happened to Betty?" I asked on behalf of Dad, prompting Jake to explain what happened after we left. Jake and Betty took a taxi to the hotel after we left on the bus to the airport. However, they encountered a problem once they were in the taxi. They couldn't communicate well with the driver because neither of them spoke French, and the driver didn't speak English. Despite the driver asking them something, they couldn't understand and ended up getting out of the taxi without realizing Betty was still inside. Jake expressed concern that he couldn't reach Betty on the phone and worried she might have been mugged or faced some other trouble after being left by the taxi. Realizing he needed help and feeling overwhelmed by the situation due to his lack of understanding of French, Jake turned to us for assistance. I reassured him that both my father and I are fluent in French. Despite Betty thinking of my father as incapable due to his age, he used to be a French teacher and I currently teach French. This trip to France was planned by Jake as a way for my father to reminisce about his youth. Upon arriving in France, my father seemed revitalized by memories of his time studying abroad. Since I also had experience studying in France during my student days, after parting ways with my brother and his wife, we shared stories about our time in France. My father listened intently, eventually nodding in understanding. Let's head back to the city center. I'm guessing the taxi that dropped you off might be waiting for its next passenger there, my father suggested. Following my father's advice, we swiftly prepared ourselves and embarked on a mission to locate Betty, who had been left behind somewhere. My father and I decided to split up and search for the taxi that had dropped off my brother and his wife when they returned to the city center. It's common for taxi drivers in the area to speak French fluently without needing to use English. Before I could reach them, my father managed to find the taxi that had taken Jake and Betty, leading us to the spot where Betty was supposed to have been dropped off. Thankfully, Betty was there, safe but looking weary. However, upon her arrival, it became evident that she had been robbed. All her bags and belongings were missing, leaving her with nothing. When Betty spotted Jake's face, tears started to form in her eyes, but she quickly put on a frown upon seeing us. "Why are they here, Betty?" Jake asked, clearly annoyed, and let out a heavy sigh. "If it wasn't for them, you'd have been stranded here with nothing, Betty. You should be thankful," Jake scolded her. Betty looked uncertain. "What do you mean?" "Without them, our trip would have been a mess. We can't speak French, so that's why we're in this situation. But they're different. They're both French teachers, much better at it than I am," Jake clarified. Betty seemed uneasy, glancing over at us. A troubling thought crossed my mind, and I quietly told Betty, "If we hadn't found you, you might have had to sleep on the streets here." Betty clenched her lip in frustration. "And besides, Jake and I split the expenses for the trip equally. So how can you say it's all funded by an old lady living off her parents' money?" With that, Betty began to tremble. "It's your father's money anyway, right?" In response to Betty's argument, my father gently shook his head. "I didn't do anything, Lisa. Jake and Betty are doing well on their own. They're my pride and joy." Just as I felt Betty's glare bore into me, she fell silent, refusing to say a single word of thanks despite being helped. I had a lot I wanted to say to her, but my father's whispered advice to take it easy made me restrain myself and stay quiet. This must have been a very embarrassing moment for Betty. She probably never expected to be rescued by someone she had looked down upon. Even Jake seemed tired of Betty's stubborn hostility towards us, his frustration evident on his face. "Well, now that everything's sorted out, shall we continue our sightseeing? Let's go to a restaurant I used to love when I was studying here," my father suggested cheerfully. With my father's optimistic suggestion, our family was united once again. We had a fantastic time in France, ignoring Betty's gloominess and fully enjoying our trip. When we returned to the States, Jake kept apologizing to us and surprisingly decided to divorce Betty. I was shocked and asked him why they had married in the first place. It turned out Betty had lied about being pregnant and pressured Jake into marrying her. After they got married, it became clear that she wasn't pregnant at all. Jake had hesitated to divorce her earlier because of his public image, but he couldn't tolerate Betty's disrespect towards my father and me anymore. After the divorce, Betty was forced out of their home and couldn't continue living as a housewife. Without a maid to help with household chores, she faced difficulties. Additionally, she lost half of her assets due to a pickpocket incident during our trip to France. She must be working hard now to make ends meet. Meanwhile, my father became noticeably happier and more lively, reminiscing about his youth in France during our trip. I decided to quit my teaching job and started a French language school at home. I hope to renovate it soon and have my father join me as a French teacher. Our family's dreams are growing, and we're excited about the future.
Hi, Eric. Mommy, you're home. Yay, where's Daddy? Eric felt uneasy when he heard this question. He looked down and said, I'm not sure. What's wrong, sweetie? Are you keeping secrets with Mommy? Eric didn't say anything but continued to look down at the floor nervously. I could tell something wasn't right. I called my husband, David. Where are you? I came for a vacation with our son. I ended the call and we quickly packed our bags and left the house. Hi, my name is Caroline and I'm 40 years old. I'm married to David, who's 42 years old. We've been married for the last 10 years. David and I used to work at the same office, which is how we met. We fell in love and got married. We were a happy couple. 2 years after David and I got married, our son Eric was born, and our family felt complete. Eric is now 8 years old. Soon after we got married, David found a better job opportunity at a different company and decided to switch. I continued working at the same company, and over time, I got promoted to a senior position. This new role required me to travel for a few days each month for business trips. When Eric was 3 years old, I was offered another promotion at work. However, it came with a condition. I would need to travel for business reasons a few days each month. I hesitated to accept because Eric was still very young, and I didn't want to leave him alone. But David reassured me. Don't worry, honey. I'll take care of Eric. Are you sure? Eric is still so little. Absolutely, he's my son too. And it's just for a few days. Okay then, I'll take the promotion. David always supported my work. He would take care of Eric when I had to go on these trips. I was really thankful to David for being so caring and supportive. Everything was going well until one day my father-in-law called. Hey David, I've been thinking about stepping down from the business. I'm getting older and can't handle the stress anymore. Is everything okay, Dad? Yeah, everything's fine. I'm just realizing I'm getting older, you know. It's time for you to take over the business. David, this isn't unexpected. I've let you have your way with everything until now, but this is something you need to do for the family. Dad, you can't make me do this. I'm not making you do anything. Just consider it. How long will you keep working a regular job? The business will give you flexibility later in life. But Dad, you're my only heir. If you don't want to take over the company, I'll have to sell it because I can't handle it anymore. I didn't intend for it to sound like that. Alright then, how about you start by working here for a month and see how it goes? But Dad, you've been running the business so smoothly for years. I'm worried I won't be able to manage it as well as you. You'll learn as you go along. I didn't know anything about business until I started doing it myself. Okay, Dad, I'll give my notice at work and wrap things up there. Even though David enjoyed his job, he knew he would have to take over the family business eventually. He was prepared for it, but he didn't expect it to happen so soon. After David joined the family business, I started noticing changes in his behavior. He would come home late, spend evenings on his phone by himself, and often be away on weekends. This went on for a few months. Eventually, I couldn't ignore it anymore and decided to talk to him about it. David, is everything okay with you? Yeah, what's up? I've noticed a change in your behavior over the past few months. What change? I don't understand what you're talking about. I wanted to address the issue so we could work on it together, but David seemed to brush off any problems. I became frustrated with his dismissive attitude. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. You come home late almost every day. And when you do come home early, instead of spending time with me or Eric, you're glued to your phone. David responded firmly, I'm busy. It's not like when I worked for a company and could finish at 7 p.m. This is my business now. I have to give it attention even after I get home. I need to coordinate with other departments over the phone. What about the weekends? Yes, sometimes we have to work on weekends too. Feeling overwhelmed, I left the room to calm down. While David's reasons made sense, I couldn't shake off my concerns. I could sense a growing distance between us, though I couldn't quite explain it to David. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt and allow him time to adjust to the business. Besides, he was a loving father to Eric and took good care of him when I was away. He even made sure to take Eric on small vacations during my business trips. As time passed, David became even busier with the business. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. Despite living under the same roof, we hardly communicated. I started wondering if my work was causing this distance between us. I often felt lonely, with no one to confide in. My parents were elderly, and I didn't want to burden them with my problems. I had lost touch with most of my friends as I became preoccupied with family and work. David's presence in my life seemed minimal. My only solace was Eric. Although he was too young to understand my troubles, spending time with him brought me joy and relief. However, I began to notice changes in Eric. His grades were dropping, and he was spending excessive time playing video games. David spoiled him with expensive video games and toys, which only seemed to worsen the situation. The next time David brought home expensive video games for Eric, I couldn't help but feel concerned. I disagree, David. Eric already has plenty of video games and toys. Adding another one isn't necessary. What do you mean? Can't I give gifts to my own son anymore? What's the problem? Eric's grades have been slipping, and he's constantly distracted by video games. It's not good for his development. He's my son. He'll figure it out on his own. You don't need to interfere. He's my son too, David. I want to make sure he's raised to be educated and responsible. Are you implying that I'm irresponsible? I've been looking after Eric since he was 3 years old, while you were away on your business trips. I was taken aback by his accusation. He had willingly taken on the responsibility of caring for Eric, and as his father, it was his duty too. But it was you who encouraged me to take the promotion and said you'd take care of Eric. Yes, I did. You should appreciate my support instead of constantly criticizing me. I've always appreciated your support for me. That's why I'm still here, despite your distant behavior. His words hit me hard, and I couldn't hold back my tears. Please don't try to paint yourself as the victim here. I lost my temper and yelled at him. I'm done with you. I don't feel any affection or gratitude towards you anymore. Taking care of Eric was your responsibility as a parent. I don't owe you anything for that. David shouted back, You're so ungrateful. Women like you can never be happy or keep their husbands happy. It was the first time David had spoken to me like this. Even when we weren't getting along, he had never been cruel. But now, he seemed like a different person. His words cut deep, and I couldn't help but cry. I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed uncontrollably. Eric overheard our argument. When he saw me locked in the bathroom for a long time, he started knocking on the door, crying, Mommy, please come out. Eventually, I washed my face, unlocked the door, and hugged him. Mommy, I was scared when you stayed in there for so long. I'm sorry, honey. I was just taking a long bath. But your hair is still dry. I chuckled and pinched his cheeks. You're quite clever, aren't you? How about spaghetti for dinner? Eric's eyes lit up. Yes, spaghetti. His excitement brought a smile to my face, pushing aside my worries. Meanwhile, David remained on the couch, engrossed in his phone. I prepared dinner for Eric and tucked him into bed. With an early flight for my business trip the next morning, I packed my bags and left a note with my travel details on David's desk. Since our relationship had grown distant, I always left a note with my travel plans for David so he could make arrangements for Eric or take him to my in-laws' house the next day. I went on my scheduled trip, but the recent arguments with David weighed heavily on my mind. I couldn't focus on my work. By the second day, I started feeling feverish and weak, so I decided to cut my trip short. I contacted my manager and explained that I was feeling unwell. They arranged for me to return home immediately. When I got back, I was looking forward to spending quality time with my son. However, when I arrived home, I found the front door locked and the lights off. I used my spare key to unlock the door and went inside. The house was dark, so I turned on the lights and headed upstairs to Eric's room. There, I found Eric playing with his video games on his bed. Hey, Eric, sweetheart. What are you doing here? And why are all the lights off in the house? Excited to see me, Eric ran over. Mommy, you're back. Yay, where's Daddy? Eric seemed uneasy when I asked about his dad. He avoided eye contact and mumbled, I don't know. When did he leave, sweetie? I'm not sure, Mommy. Dad told me not to say anything. What do you mean, honey? What's going on? Why are you keeping secrets from Mommy? Eric remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor nervously. I could tell something wasn't right. Worried, I called my husband. David, where are you? I came for a vacation with our son. I was shocked and devastated. David had been lying to me, and Eric had heard it all. I hung up the phone, staring at David in disbelief. Eric started crying. After calming him down, Eric confessed everything to me. It was heart-wrenching to hear. "Mommy, whenever you went on a trip, Daddy left me alone in the house." "What?" He continued sobbing as I held him close. "Sweetheart, how long has Daddy been leaving you alone?" "When I was little, Daddy took care of me and never left me alone. But now he locks me inside the house. He leaves food in the fridge for me and gives me video games to play." "And when does your father come back?" "Daddy comes home late at night and leaves again in the morning," Eric replied. I couldn't believe what my son had been going through while I was away. I felt guilty for leaving him in David's care. "Why didn't you tell me, sweetheart?" "At first, Dad would leave me alone for a few hours, but he always brought back lots of chocolates and toys for me. But now he's gone for the whole day. He made me promise not to tell you anything. I hate seeing him cry like this." "Okay, calm down now. Mommy's here." "I'm sorry, Mommy, for getting the new video games. I kept my promise and didn't tell you anything." "I'm sorry, sweetheart, that you had to go through all of this. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What kind of father would do such a thing?" David was rewarding Eric for keeping this terrible secret. I felt sick to my stomach. I couldn't bear to stay in that house any longer or let my child be around such a man. We packed our bags and left immediately. I hired an investigation agency to look into David's actions. After dropping Eric off at my aunt's house, I went to David's parents and told them everything. My mother-in-law couldn't believe that David could do such things. "Caroline, please don't rush into anything. Maybe there's some misunderstanding. It's not wise to make such a big decision based solely on what Eric says. He's just a child." "What do you mean?" "I know you're trying to help, but I can't even think about talking to David right now. How can I trust him after all this?" I was too angry to grasp her suggestion properly, even though she probably meant well. "Do you really believe Eric would make up something like this? And why would David lie to me about being on vacation with Eric?" "Well, maybe he was just caught up with work." I lost my patience and decided to lay everything out. "This incident isn't isolated. Your son has been distant since he joined the family business. He comes home late, hardly spends time with Eric, and often spends his weekends away." "Are you suggesting that all of this is because David joined the family business?" My father-in-law interrupted. "Brianna, let her speak," he said. "Caroline is right. I never imagined David would change like this after joining the business." Some of my senior employees mentioned David's growing closeness with his assistant. "What? Why did you tell me about this?" I brushed it off as workplace gossip. People tend to enjoy spreading rumors like that, my father-in-law explained. "I never thought David would do something like this. He loved you and Eric so much. I should have taken it seriously. I regret it now. Please forgive me, Caroline," he pleaded. I sat there in shock, unable to say anything. Brianna looked equally stunned. They both seemed devastated. David had always been seen as the perfect son, husband, and father. He had let everyone down. I couldn't blame my father-in-law because I, too, had never suspected David of having an affair despite our relationship growing colder. I attributed it to our busy schedules. I had foolishly hoped that once Eric grew up and we were free from parental duties, we'd be happy together again in our retirement. But now, everything felt shattered. After leaving my in-laws' house, I started receiving calls from David. I assumed my in-laws had spoken to him. I ignored his calls and blocked his number. I stayed with my aunt for a few days while searching for a new place to live. Eventually, the investigation agency sent their reports, confirming my suspicions. David had indeed been having an affair with his assistant, Lily. He would skip work and spend the day at her place whenever I was away. I hired a lawyer and sent divorce papers along with the evidence I received from the agency. It turned out that Lily was a single mother to a 5-year-old girl. She had been divorced by her ex-husband due to an extramarital affair during her pregnancy. When she applied for her job, she portrayed herself as a victim, claiming she divorced her husband because he cheated on her while she was pregnant. Despite her lack of qualifications, my father-in-law had given her a job out of sympathy. She deceived everyone in the office with her false story. It seemed she had also used the same tale on David. However, the investigation revealed her true nature. Further digging uncovered details about her ex-husband. He had divorced Lily without providing any alimony or child support, alleging that the baby was not his. A DNA test confirmed his claim. I forwarded all these details to David through my lawyer. According to my lawyer, David was devastated by the evidence and ended things with Lily. He accused her of breaking into our house. David wasn't ready to let go of our marriage. He loved Eric deeply and couldn't bear the thought of losing him. He admitted to my lawyer that he had been influenced by Lily and begged for another chance. He also confessed that it was Lily's idea to leave Eric alone at home, mirroring her own situation with her daughter. If it had only been me hurt by David's actions, I might have considered giving him another chance. But now it was a matter of my child's safety and upbringing. I couldn't raise Eric with a father who would bribe him into lying. After enduring so much pain, I was determined to get a divorce. It wasn't just a matter of days or months. David had betrayed my trust for years, yet I had never doubted his loyalty. I couldn't forgive him for breaking that trust. I refused any settlement other than divorce. My father-in-law apologized for David's actions and supported me throughout this ordeal. The news of David's affair and our divorce spread like wildfire throughout the office, leading to gossip and speculation. Unable to bear the shame, my father-in-law removed David and Lily from the company. He took charge again for a few years before selling the company to another businessman for a substantial sum. David's name was removed from his parents' will, and instead, Eric inherited his grandfather's legacy. David was disowned by his parents as he had shattered their trust too. David relocated to another part of the city where he faced judgment from the community for his infidelity with his assistant. Meanwhile, I transferred to a different department where I didn't have to travel as much. This allowed me to balance my work and home life more effectively. I hired a full-time nanny to care for Eric, ensuring he received the attention and care he deserved. I'm considering leaving my job in a few years. I've saved enough for my retirement and want to enjoy life to the fullest with my son. My greatest wish is for Eric to grow up into an educated and responsible individual, and I'll do everything in my power to ensure he receives the best upbringing possible.